Welcome back to today's class. Last time when we ended, we have been talking about Queen Elizabeth I of England. I will be continuing along the same thought, along the same lines. We will be discussing a bit about Renaissance, the major figures of the Renaissance, Italian Renaissance, particularly Dante and Boccaccio. And we have already talked to some length, to some extent, about Queen Elizabeth I. I will be talking about the accession of King James I, who succeeded the monarch. Now, Francis Bacon, one of the leading luminaries of this particular era, and I will talk about that. Please do not get confused. Dante and Boccaccio belong to the European Renaissance period, the so called Italian Renaissance. They are important and they have to be discussed to some extent at least, because of the immense influence they had gone on to wield on English literature and other literatures as well. So, they are extremely important, the European writers and the European Renaissance. So, do not get confused, we are not yet into the so called world literature, we are still talking about the English literature, not American literature, but English literature. But these are the major influences and therefore, they have to be discussed along with as we go by. At the same time, I am also going to set questions on the Greek heroes, the Greek gods, Greek figures figures from the Greek mythology. So, do not get confused about following a certain period. We are not strictly speaking following a chronological period, to be specific. Okay. So, there are certain movements and genres that have influenced literatures of all era, of all period, and they have to be brought in regardless of their nationality or their temporality. So, we will be talking about Renaissance, we will be talking about Boccaccio's Decameron that had an immense influence on Chaucer also, his Canterbury Tales. Then Dante's The Divine Comedy, we will also talk about certain major literary figures and certain major historical events. Last time you may recall we talked about the Mayflower voyage and also the gunpowder plot, the accession of Queen Elizabeth I. So, along the same line, because this is important to know, every literature is based, and all literature, all kinds of literature, they are based in the socio-political milieu, and it needs to be discussed. At least we need to have a nodding acquaintance with that. So, with that we begin with the first exercise. Please look at the slide here. Read the following description. Zeus fashioned a maiden out of earth and water and gave her a human voice and strength. Then the gods showered her with gifts. Athena taught her the crafts. Aphrodite bestowed on her charm about her head, as well as painful yearning and consuming obsession, whereas Hermes gave her a bit's mind and a knavish nature. The maiden was then dressed and adorned by the gods. As the maiden was laden with numerous gifts from the gods, she was called Dash, literally meaning all gift. Who are we talking about? Your choices are A. Pandora, B. Diana, C. Medusa, D. Venus. Next question. Read the following passage. Now, this is a narrative poem in 15 books completed in 8th century. It is an epic or mock epic. Poem describes the creation and history of the world, incorporating many of the best known and loved stories from Greek mythology, although centering more on mortal characters than on heroes or the gods. Each story contains some sort of transformation as the link that ties them all together. It has remained one of the most popular works of mythology and was perhaps the classical work best known to medieval writers and strongly influenced medieval and Renaissance poetry. Please go through it. You have to name the work. Look at your choices. Name the work. A. Metamorphoses by Ovid. B. Decameron by Boccaccio. C. Ars Poetica by Horace. D. Satires by Juvenal. Next question. Read the following extract. This is in Old English, as you can see. Please go through it yourself. And what is the meter used here? A. Terza rima. B. Rhyme royal. C. Heroic couplet. D. Ottava rima. Next question. Name the term the following are associated with. Desiderius Erasmus, Francesco Petrarch, Niccolo Machiavelli, Francisco Giacardini, Rudolphus Agricola, Sir Thomas More, John Colet, Montaigne. Your choices are, choose the right answer. A. The Pilgrim Fathers. B. The Royalists. C. The Humanists. D. The Reformists. Read the following. My wife, you understand well that it is not proper for a man of the world, according to the rules of this our time, to continue to court and caress you, for they say that a sensible person may take a wife indeed, but that to espouse her is to act like a fool. Let them talk. I adhere for my part the custom of the good old days. I also wear my hair as it used to be then, and in truth novelty cost this poor country up to the present moment so dear, and I do not know whether we have reached the highest pitch yet, that everywhere and in everything I renounce the fashion. Identify the work. A. Essays by Montaigne. B. Essays by Francis Bacon. C. The Knight's Tale by Chaucer. D. Decameron by Boccaccio. Next question. Identify the author here. Florence, Italy. This is the setting of the work. 1348 and the Black Death. In the church of Santa Maria Novella, a group of 7 young gentlewomen gathered to pray and discuss their sad life, hoping to find some way of alleviating their suffering. Who is the author of this particular work? Boccaccio, Petrarch, Shakespeare, Chaucer. Next question. Read the following extract. When I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days in this dark world and wide, and that one talent which is dead to hide, lodged with me useless, though my soul more bent, to serve therewith my Maker and present, my true account, least he returning chide, doth God exact day labour, light denied, I fondly ask, but patience to prevent, that murmur soon replies, God doth not need either man's work or his own gifts. Who best bar his mild yoke, they serve him best, his state is kingly, thousands at his bidding speed, and post over land and ocean without rest. They also serve who only stand and wait. Identify the meter. A. Spenserian stanza. B. Heroic couplet. C. Shakespearean sonnet. D. Petrarchan stanza. Next one. Read the following extract. Benign Apollo, this last labour aid, and make me such a vessel of thy worth, as thou own laurel claims of me. Beloved, thus far hath one of steep Parnassus' brow. Suffice me, henceforth there is need of both. For my remaining enterprise do thou enter into my bosom, and there breathe so, as when Marsyas by thy hand was dragged forth from his limbs, unsheathed. O power divine, if thou to me of shine impart so much, that of that happy realm the shadowed form, traced in my thoughts, I may set forth to view, thou shalt behold me of thy favoured tree. Come to the foot and crown myself with leaves, for to that honour thou and my high theme will fit me, if but seldom might sire. To grace his triumph gathers thence a wreath. Caesar or bard, more shame for human will's depraved joy to the Delphic god must spring from the Pyrenean foliage, when one breast is with such thirst inspired. From a small spark great flame hath risen. After me perchance others with better voice may pray, and gain from the Syrian city answer kind. Look at the style. Even if you are not familiar with this poem, look at the style here. This is exactly the kind of question that you may expect. Not exactly this, but the kind, the variety. This is the variety you find. Please take a very careful look at it. Your questions are: identify the work. A. Decameron. B. The Divine Comedy. C. Paradise Lost. D. In Praise of Folly. Number 9. Who is the author here? Of my name I have informed you, sirs. What additional epithet to give you I know not. Except you will be content with that of most foolish, for under what more proper appellation can the goddess Folly greet her devotees? But since there are few acquainted with my family and original, I will now give you some account of my extraction. Who is the author? A. Bacon. B. Chaucer. C. Erasmus. D. Boccaccio. Number 10. Read the following. O truant muse, what shall be thy amends? For thy neglect of truth in beauty died. Both truth and beauty on my love depends. So dost thou too, and therein dignified. Make answer, muse. Wilt thou not haply say, truth needs no colour, with his colour fixed? Beauty no pencil, beauty is truth to lay, but best is best if never intermixed. Question is, which is the meter here? A. Heroic couplet. B. Petrarchan stanza. C. Shakespearean sonnet. D. Spenserian stanza. Next question. Number 11. Read the extract. Will he so wise let loose at once his ire, belike through impotence or unaware, to give his enemies their wish and end them in his anger whom his anger saves? To punish endless, wherefore cease we then, say they who counsel war, we are decreed, reserved and destined to eternal woe. Whatever doing, what can we suffer more? What can we suffer worse? Is this then worst? Thus sitting, thus consulting, thus in arms. What when we fled amain, pursued and struck with heaven's afflicting thunder, and besought the deep to shelter us? This hell then seemed a refuge from those wounds. Or when we lay chained on the burning lake, that sure was worse. What if the breath that kindled those grim fires, awaked, should blow them into sevenfold rage, and plunge us in the flames, or from above should intermittent vengeance arm again his red light hand to plague us? What if all her stores were open, and this firmament of hell should spout her cataracts of fire? Impendent horrors threatening hideous fall one day upon our heads, while we perhaps designing or exhorting glorious war, caught in a fiery tempest shall be hurled. Your choices are: identify the work. A. Paradise Lost. B. The Divine Comedy. C. Troilus and Cressida. D. Odyssey. Next question. Number 12. Identify the storyteller. Now, who is the storyteller of these well-loved, much-loved stories? The ant and the grasshopper, the lion and the mouse, the fox and the crow, and the wolf and the crane. All these are composed by A. Aesop, B. La Fontaine, C. The Brothers Grimm, C. Charles Perrault. Who is the storyteller? Who is the writer here? The ant and the grasshopper, the lion and the mouse, the fox and the crow, the wolf and the crane. Number 13. Read the following passage about an eminent personality. Who is it? In 1584, he wrote his first political memorandum, a letter of advice to Queen Elizabeth. in 1592 to celebrate the anniversary of the Queen's coronation. He wrote an entertaining speech in praise of knowledge. The year 1597 marked Dash's first publication, a collection of essays about politics. Who are we talking about? Identify the person. A. Isaac Newton, B. Ben Jonson, C. John Locke, D. Francis Bacon. Next question. Choose the correct response. The first recorded burning of books is A. 1497, B. 1554, C. 1579, D. 1616. We are all aware of this act, barbaric act of burning books, banning books and burning books. Yeah. So, this is nothing new. This has been in practice, but the first recorded burning of books, such kind of an event took place in one of these years. Which one? Next question. 15. Choose the correct answer. Arcadia, an idealized pastoral world, that is the meaning of Arcadia, was first described by A. Homer, B. Spencer, C. Philip Sidney, D. Virgil. Alright, so we will discuss your answers now. A. The woman with all gifts is Pandora. When Pandora opens her box, all hell is let loose. The second passage, answer A, Metamorphosis by Ovid. Metamorphosis by Ovid. And C is, the answer is, sorry, for third one, answer is B, Rhyme Royal. A stanza of 7 10-syllable lines. The rhyme is A, B, B, C, C, and so on, popularized by Geoffrey Chaucer. It is called Rhyme Royal because James the First, King James the First of Scotland, he was a Scottish king, invited by Queen Elizabeth to take over the reins of England. So, he became James the First. So, Geoffrey Chaucer was the one who introduced this rhyming scheme meter, and James the First employed it in his own verse. So, therefore, it is called Rhyme Royal. The group of writers, thinkers, philosophers, answer is 4C, the humanists. They were the humanists. Remember, when we talk about Renaissance, we also talk about humanist tendencies, humanism, interest in everything that pertains to humans and humanity. So, humanism is the term generally applied to the dominant social philosophy and intellectual and literary currents of the era between 1400 to 1650. Okay. Those are the years at the peak of Renaissance. Reformation also happened during this period. Lots of questioning the established system. So, that was, and those people who did this, they were the humanists. Some of the features of humanism are the return to favor of the pagan classics, stimulating the philosophy of secularism, appreciation of worldly pleasures, and above all, assertion of something which is deeply personal. So, personal independence and individual expression. All these are traits of the humanists. Humanism is the term. They had a zeal for the classics. There was an interest in growing secular view of life. All this was caused because of expansion of trade, growth of prosperity, widening social contacts. So, all these things generated an interest in earthly pleasures in spite of adherence to ascetic Christian doctrine. Number 5, answer is Essays by Montaigne, A. The number 6 is A. Decameron by Boccaccio. Group of women who are very sad, they discuss their lives and they decide to go to travel a cross country trip. So, this is something that Geoffrey Chaucer was inspired by in his The Canterbury Tales. So, the influence of Decameron on Chaucer's work. You need to know Boccaccio, Giovanni Boccaccio, Italian storyteller, poet who lived between 1313 and 1375, one of the leading figures of the Italian Renaissance. He is distinguished in the world of literature because of the Decameron. Remember, he was also the first biographer of Dante and a great friend of Petrarch. So, there is a triumvirate of the 14th century Italian geniuses, Petrarch, Dante and Boccaccio. Giovanni, when he was young, he was brought up near Florence and he preferred classical studies, but he was trained for commerce by his father. Ironically, he also stated that if only my father had been indulgent to my wishes, I might have been one of the world's famous poets, but that had to happen, that was perhaps predestined for him. Later, he was sent to Naples to engage in business. He also worked for the Bardi Bank there and later studied law. He wrote a story, the Filocolo, which translated means the labor of love. It is a medieval romance retelling the love story of someone called Florio and Bianca Fier. He also wrote Filostretto, that is laid low by love, which marks the first appearance of ottava rima, a stanza which Boccaccio invented and which has been widely used in many languages since his time. So, he is credited to invent ottava rima in Filostretto. This is something, one of those very unusual kinds of questions that may come up. So, Filostretto tells the story of Troilus and Cressida, because Chaucer later on based his Troilus and Cressida on it. It is a tale of these tale of lovers that had gradually developed in the medieval stories about the siege of Troy. So, they were also the legendary lovers. So, Boccaccio was the first writer to give it an independent spin, an independent life by devoting an entire work to it. His next work was the Ameto in prose and verse. It is a group of pastoral tales with allegorical touch. The Gisad is a long narrative poem almost equal to Aeneid, and it tells a story about rivalry in love. And this is a story that Chaucer also took from him for the tale told by the knight in the Canterbury Tales. The Decameron, his magnum opus, was composed between 1348 and 53. So, you have to remember the dates 1348 and 1353. The most important single influence on the second half of his life was Petrarch, whom Boccaccio first met in Florence in 1350. Petrarch was a man with immense classical scholarship, and Boccaccio was hugely impressed by that. Through his counsel, he became determined to guide the future course of his studies. With Petrarch's urgings, Boccaccio agreed to direct the mind towards eternal things, leaving aside the delights of the temporal. That is what Petrarch said. That is what Boccaccio wanted to follow. Famous quotation, to direct the mind towards eternal things, leaving aside the delights of the temporal. He stopped composing in the vernacular to follow Petrarch's guidance and started writing exclusive works in Latin. That was the language of that period. For many years, he had admired Dante's writings as well, had collected as many first-hand biographical details, and then he wrote the first biography, Life of Dante, in 1353. In 1373, Boccaccio was asked by Florence Intelligentsia to deliver the first public lecture ever on the Divine Comedy. He began but never completed the series because of ill health. He died at a place called Certaldo and was buried there. The epitaph on his tomb is, his study was gracious poetry. His study was gracious poetry, a life devoted to pursuit of literature and classical literature, classics. After that, question or number 7, answer is D, Petrarchan. The rhyme scheme is A B B A B B A C D E C D E. So, that is the Petrarchan's stanza. 8th is answer B, the Divine Comedy, and 9th is C, Erasmus in Praise of Folly. 10th is a Shakespearean sonnet. Shakespearean, as you know, sonnets are 14-line poems. In Shakespearean sonnets, the rhyme pattern is A B A B, C D C D, E F E F, G G. Extremely easy to remember, with a surprise ending. Okay, and the rhythmic pattern of the sonnets is the so-called iambic pentameter. The answer to the 11th question is A, Paradise Lost, and this storyteller and the ant and the grasshopper, fox and the crow, etc. Answer is 12, B, La Fontaine, and 13 is D, Francis Bacon. 14th, the first recorded public burning of books is B, 1554. The book is The History of Italy by someone called William Thomas. And the answer to the 15th question is D, Arcadia is first described by Virgil in his Eclogues. So, Philip Sidney did write a seminal book called Arcadia, but it was first referred to by Virgil in his Eclogues. Now, we will continue with the major events of this particular period. We have already finished talking about the accession of Queen Elizabeth I, and now we will talk about the accession of King James. Now, Queen Elizabeth, as you may recall, was never married. She was popularly revered as the Virgin Queen. She had no children, no heirs. So, a few days before her death, she named James Stuart as the next King of England. He was already James VI of Scotland, having ascended the throne at the age of 1. So, he took over the reins of England. One of the most important event of his rule was the publication of King James Version, also called the Authorized Version of King James Bible. Remember, English translation of the Bible was published in 1611 under the auspices of King James I of England. It is important because the translation had a marked influence on English literary style and was generally accepted as the standard English Bible from the mid 17th century to the early 20th century. You may also remember that the reign of Queen Elizabeth I succeeded in imposing a high degree of uniformity upon the Church of England. You may also recall how there was a big conflict between the crown and the church during the reign of Henry VIII. Persecution of the Protestants, and we also remember Martin Luther and his doctrines and his efforts to and his attempts to bring about a kind of reformation in the church. So, Queen Elizabeth's reign during that period, more or less she succeeded in imposing a kind of uniformity upon the Church of England. Protestantism was reinstated as the official religion of England. This was important because Mary I, who preceded Queen Elizabeth I. Mary ruled only for 5 years, 1553 to 58. She had attempted to restore Roman Catholicism in the country. Coming back to King James I in 1604, soon after James's coronation as the King of England, a conference of churchmen requested that the English Bible be revised because existing translations were corrupt. So, this is one of the major events of the king's rule. And remember the gunpowder plot and how it connects to all this. So, that had a lot of the reason for the plot to assassin the king was more or less of religious nature. When we talk about people like Dante, Boccaccio, and also people like Francis Bacon, the Queen Elizabeth I, we are talking about the Renaissance. I have been talking about Renaissance very frequently during the course of my several lectures. I would like to reiterate how important this so-called period is. This period that started in the later parts of the 14th century and went on till the mid 17th century is a period, so that we can an easy translation is the rebirth. Renaissance is called the rebirth. So, what was the rebirth all about? It was the discovery and exploration of new continents. So, rebirth of knowledge, substitution of the Copernican for the Ptolemaic system of astronomy. You should know what is Copernican, what is Ptolemaic system of astronomy. It was the period also witnessed the decline of the feudal system, the growth of commerce, invention of application of such innovations such as paper, printing, the mariner's compass and the gunpowder. For those interested in literature and classical learning, it was a time of the revival of classical learning and wisdom after a long period of cultural decline and stagnation during the medieval period, the Dark Ages. At all events, the Renaissance was heralded through the recovery by Italian scholars of Greek and Roman classical literature. So, an interest in the classics. In Italy especially, when the wave of barbarism had passed, the people began to feel a return of consciousness of their ancient culture and a desire to reproduce. To Italians, the Latin language was easy and their country abounded in documents and monumental records which symbolize past greatness. One such great writer of the Renaissance period was Dante Alighieri, the Italian poet who lived between 1265 and 1321, one of the most important figures of the Renaissance, at the center of the Renaissance period. Best remembered as the author of the Divine Comedy, from which we have just seen an extract. He was a soldier, a politician, a statesman, a lyric poet, philosopher, in other words, a Renaissance man. He was reared in the artistic society of Florence, studied the classics and also medieval texts of rhetoric and theology. He tried his hand at poetry and painting. Also as statesman and a soldier, he took great pride in narrating that he fought in a local Florentine war and vigorously on horseback in the front rank. That's how he liked to describe his expertise. Now, one thing about Dante, and we cannot escape, is his love for a girl called Beatrice. At the age of 9, he had his first glimpse of Beatrice. After that, he saw her only a few times. Beatrice and Dante went on to marry other people. She died at the age 24, but she became his ideal, the inspiration of his life. The other day we were talking about Philip Sidney and his love for Penelope, courtly love, a woman who becomes somebody's muse, and he spends the rest of his life writing great works of literature in memory or in honor of her. So, the Divine Comedy is the direct agent, for him, for Dante, the divine Beatrice became the inspiration for the Divine Comedy, the direct agent of his salvation. We have already talked about the troubadours, the wandering minstrels who would write poems in praise of a particular woman, and here was Dante who would, through the rest of his life, write in praise of Beatrice. Between 1292 and 94, he put together a work called The New Life, La Vita Nova, an account of his devotion to Beatrice, and there is a slight autobiographical framework also connecting 31 of the symbolic poems which she had inspired. Beatrice is Latin, in Latin it means blessed. So, more or less he looks upon his love with the Christian salvation, symbolizing Christian salvation. From Vita Nova he went forward with the Divine Comedy, and he is said to have declared, to say of her what has never been said of any other woman. That is what he wanted to know. So, the Divine Comedy, one of the greatest works of literature ever. Okay, I would urge you to go through it, understand some of the excerpts, understand the background, the Renaissance period in which it was composed. It is a very important document, it is a very important text for those who are appearing for this kind of an exam. And the last luminary that I wanted to focus today is Francis Bacon. Bacon is several things, but he was also, we know him as an essayist. In the 20th and 21st century, Bacon's reputation as the foremost essayist has been cemented. But we should also remember that Bacon held his place in the British Parliament for nearly 4 decades, from 1584 to 1617. He was very active in politics, law and the royal court. In 1603 he was knighted, so Sir Francis Bacon, after James I's accession to the British throne. His ascent was quite rapid and swift. He was the Solicitor General in 1607 and Attorney General for 6 years later. In 1616 his career peaked when he was invited to join the Privy Council. A year later he reached the same position as his father, the Lord Keeper of the Great Seal. If you do not know these terms, please look them up. Lord Keeper of the Great Seal, what do they do? So, this is what his father did, and it is a position of great responsibility and prestige. In 1618, Bacon was promoted to the title of Lord Chancellor, one of the highest political offices in England. In 1621, he was the Viscount St. Albans. However, soon afterwards, he was charged by Parliament with accepting bribes, and surprisingly he admitted to all the charges. He was fined, imprisoned and then banished from the court. The king pardoned him later, but that was the end of Bacon's public life. In 1620, Bacon published book 1 of Novum Organum Scientiarum, that is a new method in science, and he established himself as a reputed philosopher or reputable philosopher of science. So, he was not just an essayist, a renowned essayist as we know him, he was many other things as well. During his career as counsel and a statesman, Bacon often wrote for the court. In 1584, he wrote his first political memorandum, a letter of advice to Queen Elizabeth. In 1592, to celebrate the anniversary of the Queen's coronation, he wrote an entertaining speech in praise of knowledge. The year 1597 marked his first publication, a collection of essays about politics. Okay, so all this was before the charges of corruption, remember, but Bacon had a very long successful career. He also wrote or published The Advancement of Learning, which was a sort of attempt to rally more support for the study of sciences. The Advancement of Learning, published in 1605. In 1609, he departed from political and scientific genres and released On the Wisdom of the Ancients, his analysis of ancient mythology. Bacon then resumed writing about science and in 1620 published Novum Organum, presented as part 2 of The Great Saturation. In 1622, he wrote a historical work for Prince Charles entitled The History of Henry VII. In 1623, he published one of his most successful works, The Augmentis Scientiarum, a continuation of his view on scientific reforms. And in 1624, his works The New Atlantis and Apothegm were published. Silva Silvarium, which was published in 1627, was among the last of his written works. So, Sir Francis Bacon, one of the most important names of the English period, of the Renaissance period during Elizabeth I and James I. And before I wind up, I would like you to take a look at this very short video on Dante's The Divine Comedy. Please look at the link here.